A very poor girl goes into a bakery and asks a millionaire if she can exchange her necklace for a loaf of bread because her baby brother is hungry and crying. The millionaire is completely shocked to recognize that necklace. It was the same. As someone from his past, watch until the end to understand this beautiful story. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the warm air of Harrison's Bakery, a quaint establishment tucked away in a quiet corner of Manhattan's Upper East Side. Alexander Morgan stood near the counter, his tailored Armani suit a stark contrast to the homey atmosphere of the small bakery. This was his daily ritual, a small rebellion against the sterile environment of his corporate empire. A moment where he could pretend to be just another customer seeking their morning sustenance. The early morning sun cast long shadows through the large windows, creating a dance of light and shadow on the worn wooden floors. For Alexander, this was the only time of day when he allowed himself to slow down, to breathe in the simple pleasure, to have fresh pastries and coffee, away from the constant demands of being one of New York's most successful financiers. He watched as Mrs. Harrison, the owner's wife, carefully arranged a new batch of croissants in the display case. The familiar routine of the bakery staff, the gentle hum of conversation, and the rhythmic sound of the coffee machine created a soothing symphony that helped him forget, if only for a moment, the weight of running a multi-billion-dollar investment firm. The bell above the door chimed, barely audible over the morning bustle. Alexander wouldn't have noticed it at all if not for the sudden shift in atmosphere. A small figure had entered the bakery, drawing curious glances from the other patrons. It was a young girl, no more than 10 years old, her clothes worn and dirty, her dark hair tangled and unkempt. She clutched something tightly in her small hand, and her eyes darted nervously around the shop. Alexander found himself watching her, unable to look away. There was something about her presence that seemed out of place in this upscale neighborhood, yet she carried herself with a dignity that belied her apparent circumstances. She approached several customers, each time being met with awkward glances and hurried steps away. Finally, she made her way to where Alexander stood. He noticed her eyes were a striking shade of amber, filled with a mixture of determination and desperation. She looked up at him, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then, in a voice barely above, a whisper, she asked, "Sir, could I trade this necklace for some bread?" She held out her hand, revealing a silver necklace with an unusual pendant, a sun design etched into what appeared to be an old stone. The craftsmanship was unique, unlike anything Alexander had seen in the high-end jewelry stores he frequented. But it wasn't the necklace itself that caught his attention. It was the way the girl's hand trembled as she held it out, as if offering up a piece of her soul. "My baby brother," she continued, her voice stronger now. "He hasn't eaten since yesterday. He won't stop crying." Her eyes never left Alexander's face, studying his reaction with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "This is all I have to trade." "Please, sir." Alexander felt something stir within him, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. The girl's request was simple, yet it carried a weight that seemed to press against his chest. He found himself looking more closely at the necklace, and as he did, a memory stirred, faint and distant like a half-remembered dream. The sun design on the pendant seemed familiar, triggering something in the recesses of his mind. He had seen this symbol before, many years ago, in a small town far from the gleaming towers of Manhattan. The realization made him catch his breath, and for a moment, the busy bakery faded away, replaced by shadows of his past. Mrs. Harrison had stopped arranging her pastries and was watching the interaction with concern, her hands frozen mid-task. The other customers continued their morning routines, but Alexander could feel their sideways glances, their quiet judgments, of this unusual scene playing out in their pristine morning sanctuary. "What's your name?" he found himself asking, his voice softer than usual. The question surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise the girl. In his world of swift business decisions and calculated risks, personal questions were rarely part of the equation. The girl hesitated, studying Alexander's face as if trying to determine whether he could be trusted. "Sophia," she finally answered, her fingers tightening around the necklace. Sofia Martinez. The name echoed in Alexander's mind, stirring more half-buried memories. Martinez. He knew that name from somewhere, but the connection danced just beyond his grasp. The sun pendant caught the morning light, sending a brief flash across the bakery wall, and Alexander felt a sudden urge to understand more about this child who had wandered into his carefully ordered world. "And your brother?" he asked, watching as Sofia's expression softened at the mention of her sibling. "Lucas," she replied, a gentle smile breaking through her serious demeanor. "He's only 2. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We don't have anyone else now, just each other." The weight of unspoken history hung heavy in her words. Alexander turned to Mrs. Harrison, who had been watching their interaction with increasing interest. "Please give Ms. Martinez here whatever bread she needs." He paused, then added, "And some of those chocolate croissants as well." The woman nodded, already moving to gather the items. Sofia's eyes widened, and she thrust the necklace toward him with renewed urgency. "Here, take it. It's all I have to pay you with." The desperation in her voice made Alexander's chest tighten uncomfortably. He gently pushed her hand back. "Keep it. The necklace. It means something to you, doesn't it?" The question seemed to surprise her, and for a moment her carefully maintained composure cracked. "It was my mother's," she whispered, her fingers tracing the sun design. "She said it was a symbol of our family's strength, that as long as we had it, we would never lose hope." Sofia's voice caught slightly, and she quickly looked down at her worn shoes. As Mrs. Harrison began filling a large paper bag with various breads and pastries, Alexander found himself studying Sofia more carefully. There was something eerily familiar about her features, the set of her jaw, the determined look in her eyes. It reminded him of someone he had known long ago in a different life, before Wall Street and billion-dollar deals had become his world. "Where is your brother now?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual while his mind raced with possibilities. Sofia's guard went up immediately. "He's safe," she said firmly, her chin lifting slightly in defiance. "I take care of him." Mrs. Harrison finished packing the bag, adding extra pastries when she thought no one was looking. She handed it to Sofia, who accepted it with trembling hands, as if she couldn't quite believe her good fortune. "Thank you, sir," Sofia said, clutching the bag to her chest. "I won't forget this." She turned to leave, but Alexander found himself reaching out, stopping just short of touching her shoulder. "Wait," he said, surprising himself again. "Let me help you carry that. It's heavy for someone your size." The words came out before he could analyze them, before his usual careful consideration of every action could kick in. Sofia looked at him suspiciously, then at the bag of food, clearly torn between her need to return to her brother and her instinct to avoid further interaction with strangers. Finally, she nodded, though Alexander could see she remained wary. As they stepped out of the bakery into the morning sunlight, Alexander felt as if he was stepping into something much bigger than a simple act of charity. The sun pendant, Sofia's familiar features, the name Martinez, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed were starting to form in his mind, creating a picture that both intrigued and unsettled him. The morning crowds parted around them as they walked, the unlikely pair drawing curious glances from passing business people and dog walkers. Sofia led the way with determined steps, navigating the streets with the confidence of someone who had learned to survive in a world that wasn't designed to protect them. Sofia led Alexander through a maze of side streets, away from the polished facades of the Upper East Side. With each turn, the buildings grew less pristine, the streets less maintained. Alexander found himself in a part of the city he'd never seen, despite having lived in New York for over 2 decades. Here the morning sun cast different shadows, harder ones across crumbling brick walls and rusted fire escapes. "It's not much further," Sofia said, her voice barely audible above the distant rumble of traffic. She clutched the bag of bread, tighter, as if afraid it might disappear. Alexander noticed how she occasionally glanced back at him, checking if he was still following, ready to run if necessary. They turned into a narrow alley where Sophia stopped beside a partially hidden doorway. She hesitated, clearly conflicted about letting this stranger see where she and her brother had found shelter. Alexander remained a few steps back, understanding her reluctance. "You don't have to show me," he said softly. "I can leave the food." "Here if you prefer." Sophia studied him for a long moment, her amber eyes seeming to look straight through his expensive suit to something deeper. Finally, she made a decision. "No, come. Lucas should meet the person who helped us. He needs to learn about kindness." The words struck Alexander like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had described him as kind? In his world of hostile takeovers and merger negotiations, kindness was often seen as weakness. Yet here was this child, seeing something in him that he'd almost forgotten existed. She led him through the doorway into what had once been a small workshop. Sunlight filtered through dirty windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. In the corner, on a makeshift bed of blankets, sat a small boy with the same striking amber eyes as his sister. "Lucas," Sophia called softly, "look what I brought." The toddler's face lit up at the sight of his sister, but he quickly buried his face in the blankets when he noticed Alexander. As Sophia began unpacking the bread, Alexander took in their living conditions. The space was clean despite its deteriorating state, and he could see Sophia's attempts to create a home. A small collection of books salvaged from somewhere, a toy car carefully positioned near Lucas's blankets, a crude drawing taped to the wall showing three figures holding hands under a bright sun. "You've been here long?" Alexander asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. Sophia arranged the food carefully on a piece of cardboard that served as their table. "A few weeks. It's better than our last place. Quieter." She broke off a piece of bread and handed it to Lucas, who accepted it eagerly. Alexander watched as the little boy ate, his hunger evident in every bite. Something about Lucas's features tugged at his memory even more strongly than Sophia's had. The shape of his nose, the set of his jaw. They reminded him of someone, but the connection remained frustratingly out of reach. "That drawing," Alexander said, gesturing to the paper on the wall. "Did you make it?" Sophia nodded, a flash of pride crossing her face. "It's our family. Me, Lucas, and—" She trailed off, her expression clouding over. "It doesn't matter now." But it did matter. Alexander could feel it in the way Sophia's voice caught, in the way her hand automatically went to the sun pendant around her neck. Every instinct honed through years of reading people in business negotiations told him there was more to this story, something crucial hidden beneath the surface. "Sophia," he began carefully, "that necklace, with the sun design, I've seen one like it before, many years ago in a small town called Nueva Esperanza." The effect of his words was immediate. Sophia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise and something else. Recognition, fear. She took an instinctive step closer to Lucas, who continued eating, oblivious to the sudden tension in the room. "How do you know that name?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Nobody here knows about Nueva Esperanza." Alexander's heart began to race. The pieces were there, just starting to come together, but the picture they were forming seemed impossible. He thought back to that small town on the border, to a summer 20 years ago that he'd tried so hard to forget, to a girl with amber eyes who'd given him a pendant just like Sophia's. Before Alexander could pursue the connection further, Lucas began coughing, drawing Sophia's immediate attention. She rushed to her brother's side, helping him take small sips from a water bottle she produced from their meager belongings. The moment of revelation passed, replaced by the immediate concerns of caring for a toddler. Alexander watched as Sophia tended to her brother with practiced ease, noting how she seemed to anticipate his needs before he could express them. She was more than just a sister. She had become a mother figure to Lucas, forced to grow up far too quickly. "You need proper shelter," Alexander said, the words coming out more abruptly than he'd intended. "This isn't safe for either of you." Sophia's back stiffened, but she didn't turn around. "We're fine," she replied, her voice carrying an edge of defensiveness. "I take care of us, I always have." "I don't doubt that," Alexander said softly. "But you shouldn't have to. You're just a child yourself." He reached into his pocket for his business card, then hesitated. Would she even trust him enough to accept help? Sophia finally turned to face him, her expression a mixture of pride and exhaustion. "Why do you care? You don't know us. You've done enough already with the bread." Alexander looked at the sun pendant again, gathering his thoughts. 20 years ago in Nueva Esperanza, I knew someone. Her name was Isabella Martinez. He watched Sophia carefully as he spoke the name. The girl's face paled, and her hand flew to the pendant. You knew my mother." The words came out, barely above a whisper. "Isabella," Alexander said, the name feeling strange on his tongue after so many years. "She was unlike anyone I'd ever met. She believed in helping others, in the power of kindness. She gave me a pendant like yours, said it would remind me that there was more to life than money and success." Sophia sank down onto the blankets beside Lucas, who had fallen asleep after his meal. "She never told me. She never mentioned knowing anyone from New York. I was different then," Alexander admitted. "I was just starting out in finance, spending a summer learning about cross-border investments. Isabella worked as a translator for our firm. She showed me a world beyond spreadsheets and profit margins." The morning light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the workshop floor. Through the dirty windows, the sounds of the city growing louder as the day progressed filtered in, a reminder of the world continuing its relentless pace outside. "What happened between you and my mother?" Sophia asked, her voice stronger now, demanding answers. Alexander moved to the window, looking out at the city he'd made his kingdom, but which now seemed somehow hollow. "We were young. I had dreams of building an empire, and she had different dreams. Dreams of making the world better, of helping people who needed it most." He turned back to Sophia, seeing Isabella's determination reflected in her daughter's face. "I chose my path and she chose hers. The last time I saw her, she gave me that pendant's twin, telling me that someday I'd understand what really mattered in life." Sophia's expression softened slightly. "She always said the sun pendant would guide us to where we needed to be. I thought it was just a story to make us feel better, but..." She looked at Alexander with new understanding. Maybe she knew something we didn't. The implications of their connection hung heavy in the air between them. Alexander felt the weight of 20 years of choices, of paths not taken pressing down on him. Here was his chance to finally understand what Isabella had tried to tell him all those years ago. "Sophia," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "let me help you and Lucas. Not out of pity, but because it's what Isabella would have wanted, because maybe it's what I need too." Sophia sat in silence for several long moments, her fingers absently tracing the sun design on her pendant. The morning light had grown stronger, illuminating the dust particles that danced through the air of their makeshift home. Lucas stirred in his sleep, and she automatically reached out to smooth his hair, a gesture so natural it seemed like breathing. "How do I know I can trust you?" she finally asked, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had learned the hard way that trust was a luxury they couldn't always afford. "Just because you knew my mother doesn't mean..." "You don't," Alexander interrupted gently. "To know that you can trust me, I mean, and you're right to be cautious." He moved slowly, deliberately, and sat down on an old crate near them, trying to appear less imposing. "But I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking you to let me prove that you can." The sounds of the city drifted through the broken window. Car horns, distant sirens, the general buzz of New York waking up to another day. Sophia looked around their sparse living space, her eyes lingering on Lucas's sleeping form, then on the few possessions they had managed to keep with them. "We've had help offered before," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the city noise. "People who said they wanted to help, but..." She stopped, swallowing hard. "They always wanted something in return, or they made promises they didn't keep." Alexander felt something twist inside his chest. How many times had these children been disappointed? How many broken promises had they endured? In his world of high finance, a person's word was supposedly their bond, Yet here was a child who had learned that adults' promises could be as insubstantial as morning mist. "I have a proposal," he said, choosing his words carefully. "There's a hotel not far from here, the Carlisle. Let me get you and Lucas a room there, just for a few days. You'll have proper beds, hot water, room service. You can rest, think things through, no strings attached." Sophia's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the Carlisle. She'd probably walked past it before, seen the gleaming brass doors and uniformed doormen, never imagining she could step inside such a place. "And if we want to leave?" she asked, her chin lifting slightly in defiance. "Then you leave," Alexander replied simply. "I'll make sure you have enough money for food and whatever else you need. But I hope you'll give me a chance to show you that there are still people worth trusting." Lucas chose that moment to wake up, his small face scrunching up before his eyes opened. He looked around blearily before focusing on his sister, reaching for her with complete trust. Sophia gathered him into her arms, and Alexander watched as the tough, suspicious girl transformed into a gentle, nurturing presence. "What do you think, pequeño?" she whispered to Lucas, switching unconsciously to Spanish. "Should we trust this man who knew Mama?" Lucas looked at Alexander with curious eyes, showing none of his earlier shyness. Perhaps it was the food in his belly, or maybe it was the way Alexander had kept his distance, letting them maintain their space. Whatever the reason, the toddler gave a small smile. "He looks nice," Lucas said in English, his voice carrying the sweet innocence of childhood. "Like the pictures." Sophia's head snapped up. "What pictures, Lucas?" "In Mama's box," he replied, already distracted by playing with Sophia's pendant. "The ones you look at when you think I'm sleeping." Alexander watched as emotions flashed across Sophia's face, surprise, confusion, understanding. She reached into a worn backpack and pulled out a small wooden box, its surface smooth from years of handling. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, beneath a few precious photographs and documents, lay a familiar silver pendant, identical to the one around Sophia's neck, but tarnished with age. And beneath it, a photograph that made Alexander's breath catch in his throat. A much younger version of himself standing beside Isabella Martinez, both of them smiling beneath the bright sun of Nueva Esperanza. Alexander stared at the photograph, memories flooding back with an intensity that made his hands shake. He remembered that day clearly. The way the sun had beat down on the dusty streets of Nueva Esperanza, how Isabella had laughed when he'd complained about the heat in his business suit, how she'd convinced him to roll up his sleeves and loosen his tie for the picture. "I never knew she kept this," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "She always said photographs captured more than just images. They captured moments of truth." Sophia handled the photograph carefully, as if it might crumble in her hands. "I found this box after..." She paused, gathering herself. "When we had to leave our home, I didn't understand why she kept these things, but now..." Lucas crawled into his sister's lap, reaching for the photograph with curious fingers. Sophia gently moved it away, but not before the toddler got a good look. "That's the man," he exclaimed, pointing at Alexander's younger self. But his hair was darker. A ghost of a smile crossed Sophia's face. "People change, Lucas. They get older." She looked up at Alexander, really studying him now, some more than others. Alexander ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair, remembering how it had once been as dark as Sophia's. 20 years is a long time," he said. "Long enough to build an empire, to forget what matters most. Your mother tried to tell me that once." Sophia carefully returned the photograph to the box, but kept the tarnished pendant in her hand. "She used to hold this sometimes when she thought we were asleep. She would look at it and cry." She held it out to Alexander. I think she meant for you to have it back someday." Alexander shook his head, gently closing Sophia's fingers. "Over the pendant. Keep it, both of them. They're part of your story now." He stood up, brushing dust from his expensive suit. "But let me help write the next chapter, please." The morning had fully bloomed outside their window, the sun now high enough to cast warm squares of light across the workshop floor. In the distance, church bells began to ring, their sound carrying clearly through the cool air. Sophia looked at Lucas, who had returned to playing with her pendant, then at the box of precious memories in her lap, and finally at Alexander. He could see the internal struggle playing out across her face, the weight of responsibility, the fear of trust, the desperate hope for something better. "The hotel," she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "We'll go to the hotel for a few days, but I need you to promise me something." "Anything," Alexander replied, meaning it more than he'd meant any business deal or contract in his life. "Promise me you won't disappear again, not like in the photograph. Lucas, he's too young to understand another loss." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Alexander knelt down to be at eye level with Sophia, maintaining a respectful distance but wanting her to see the truth in his face. "I made that mistake once, choosing the wrong path. I won't make it again." Sophia nodded slowly, then began gathering their few belongings. Lucas helped in his own way, carefully folding his favorite blanket with clumsy toddler hands. Alexander watched them, seeing both the children they were and the shadows of what they had been forced to become. As Sophia shouldered their worn backpack and picked up the wooden box, Alexander noticed something fall from between its aged boards. Another photograph, this one more recent. He picked it up before Sophia could reach it and felt his heart stop for a moment. The image showed Isabella, older than he remembered but still beautiful, holding a baby that must have been Lucas, and there written on the back in her distinctive handwriting, "For Alexander, if fate is kind." Alexander's hands trembled as he stared at Isabella's message on the back of the photograph. The implications of those words, "if fate is kind," struck him with the force of a physical blow. Had she known, somehow, that their paths would cross again through her children? Sophia watched him intently, her eyes narrowing at his reaction to the photograph. "What does it say?" she asked, taking a step closer. Before Alexander could respond, Lucas tugged at his sister's sleeve. "Sophia, I'm hungry again," the little boy said, his voice small but insistent. The moment of revelation was broken by the simple, immediate needs of a child. "We'll get you something proper to eat at the hotel," Alexander said, carefully tucking the photograph into his jacket pocket. He would show it to Sophia later, when the time was right. For now, the priority was getting these children somewhere safe and comfortable. The walk to the Carlisle was like crossing between worlds. With each block, the buildings grew more polished, the streets cleaner, the people better dressed. Sophia held Lucas's hand tightly, her other hand clutching their worn backpack. Alexander noticed how she kept close to walls and doorways, maintaining escape routes, habits learned from months of survival on the streets. The doorman at the Carlisle, James, did a double take when he saw Alexander approaching with the children. In 15 years, he had never seen the businessman with anyone who could be considered family. But to his credit, James's professional demeanor never wavered. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan," he said, opening the door with a flourish that made Lucas giggle. "Welcome back." The lobby of the Carlisle was a study in understated luxury. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, elegant furniture. Sophia stood still for a moment, taking it all in, while Lucas's eyes grew wide with wonder. Alexander guided them discreetly toward the private elevator, aware of the curious glances from the hotel staff. "Mr. Morgan," the front desk manager approached, her perfect smile barely masking her confusion. "We weren't expecting you today. Shall I prepare your usual suite?" "No, Margaret," Alexander replied smoothly. "I need a family suite, please, something comfortable with 2 bedrooms, and send up a selection of children's clothes and toys." He glanced at Sophia and Lucas's worn attire, and some immediate necessities. Margaret's professional training kicked in immediately. "Of course, sir. I'll have everything arranged right away." She typed rapidly into her computer. "Suite 1506 is available. It has a lovely view of the park." As they rode up in the elevator, Lucas pressed his face against the glass wall, watching the city shrink beneath them. Sophia maintained her composure, but Alexander could see her hands shaking slightly as she held onto her brother. The suite, when they entered it, was larger than any space the children had likely seen in months. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park. Plush carpets muffled their footsteps, and elegant furniture invited comfort and rest. Lucas broke away from his sister and ran straight to the windows, pressing his hands against the glass. "Sophia, look! We can see all the trees." Sophia stood in the middle of the living room, looking lost among the luxury. Alexander watched as she took in their surroundings. The fresh flowers in crystal vases, the fruit basket on the dining table, the thick terry cloth robes hanging in the closet. He could see her struggling to reconcile this new reality with the life they'd been living. "The second bedroom is through there," he said gently, pointing to a door. "Why don't you and Lucas get cleaned up? There should be some basic supplies in the bathroom, and more things will be sent up soon." Sophia nodded mutely, then called to Lucas. The little boy ran to her, his earlier shyness forgotten in the excitement of this new adventure. As they disappeared into the bedroom, Alexander heard Lucas's voice. "Sophia, is this our new home?" The question hung in the air, and Alexander heard Sophia's soft reply, "Let's just get cleaned up first, pequeño. One step at a time." Left alone in the living room, Alexander walked to the windows, looking out at the city he had conquered but never truly called home. The photograph in his pocket seemed to burn against his chest, Isabella's words echoing in his mind. After 20 years of building walls around himself, of measuring success in dollars and cents, fate had indeed been kind or perhaps cruel enough to give him a second chance. The transformation was remarkable. After an hour, Sophia and Lucas emerged from their bedroom looking like different children. Their faces were clean, their hair wet from proper showers, and they wore fresh clothes that had been sent up by the hotel staff. Lucas couldn't stop touching his new soft blue sweater, while Sophia had chosen a simple white blouse and jeans that made her look her age for the first time since Alexander had met her. "Feel better?" Alexander asked, trying to keep his voice casual despite the emotion tightening his throat. Lucas nodded enthusiastically, but Sophia's response was more measured. "Yes, thank you," she said, still maintaining a careful distance. "But what happens now?" Before Alexander could answer, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his office, the board meeting he was supposed to attend in 30 minutes. For the first time in his career, he hadn't given a thought to his business obligations. "First we eat," he said, setting his phone aside without responding to the message. "Then we talk. Really talk." He ordered a feast from room service: pancakes, eggs, fresh fruit, pastries, hot chocolate for the children, and coffee for himself. When the food arrived, Lucas's eyes grew wide at the sight of so many options. Sophia helped him settle at the dining table, cutting his pancakes into small pieces with the care of a mother. As they ate, Alexander noticed how Sophia made sure Lucas had everything he needed before taking anything for herself. Even now, surrounded by abundance, her protective instincts remained sharp. It reminded him painfully of Isabella, who had always put others first. "Your mother," he began carefully, watching Sophia's reaction. "She worked as more than just a translator in Nueva Esperanza. She was a community organizer, helping families who needed support. She believed that real change happened one person at a time." Sophia paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. "She never stopped," she said quietly. "Even after we moved to the city, she was always helping people. Sometimes we'd have families staying with us, people who needed a place to sleep or food to eat." "That sounds like Isabella," Alexander smiled, memories flooding back. "She never could turn away someone in need." "Is that why you left?" Sophia's question was direct, her eyes challenging. "Because she cared more about helping others than building an empire?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Lucas looked up from his pancakes, sensing the tension in his sister's voice. "No," Alexander replied slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I left because I was young and foolish. I thought I knew what was important in life. Your mother, she tried to show me there was more to success than money, but I wasn't ready to understand." "And now," Sophia pressed, her hand unconsciously going to her pendant. Before Alexander could answer, his phone buzzed again, this time with multiple messages. His assistant was probably panicking about his absence from the board meeting. 20 years of perfect attendance, never missing a single important meeting, and now, he said, turning off his phone completely, I'm beginning to understand what Isabella meant about real wealth. He pulled out the photograph he'd found earlier, the one with Isabella's message on the back, and placed it on the table between them. Sophia picked it up with trembling hands, reading the words her mother had written. She knew, she whispered. Somehow she knew we'd find you. Lucas leaned over to look at the photograph. Mama looks happy, he said simply, reaching for another piece of pancake. She was, Alexander confirmed, watching the little boy who had Isabella's smile. Your mother knew how to find joy in helping others, in building connections. I lost sight of that when I left Nueva Esperanza. But perhaps... He paused, looking at the two children who had unexpectedly entered his life. Perhaps it's not too late to remember. Sophia was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Lucas's hair as she studied the photograph. Finally, she looked up at Alexander, her expression softening slightly. You really want to help us, don't you? Not just with money and hotel rooms, but really help? Yes, Alexander replied simply. If you'll let me. The morning sun had risen fully now, streaming through the windows and bathing the room in warm light. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, but in this moment, in this room, something was shifting. Old patterns breaking, new possibilities emerging. The rest of the morning passed in a gentle rhythm of small discoveries. Lucas found the television remote and was delighted by cartoons he'd only seen through store windows before. Sophia explored the suite with careful attention, as if memorizing every detail, every possible exit. And Alexander watched them both, seeing how they adapted to this new environment in their own ways. His phone remained off, the outside world temporarily held at bay. For the first time in decades, Alexander Morgan, the man whose signature could move billions of dollars, found himself completely focused on something other than business. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent years building an empire of wealth, yet here he was, finding more meaning in helping two children than in any merger or acquisition. Mr. Morgan, Sophia's voice interrupted his thoughts. She had approached, quietly while Lucas was absorbed in his cartoons. I found this in the bedroom. She held out a newspaper that had been part of the morning's delivery to the suite. The business section featured his photo alongside an article about his company's latest technological venture. Alexander, he corrected gently. Please call me Alexander. He took the paper, looking at his own image. Stern, powerful, successful by every conventional measure. Not my best photo. The article says you're worth billions, Sophia said, her voice careful, measured, that you're one of the most powerful men in New York. She paused, studying his face. Why didn't you tell us? Alexander set the paper aside. Would it have made a difference? Would it have made you trust me more or less? Sophia considered this, unconsciously touching her pendant again, a gesture Alexander was beginning to recognize as her way of grounding herself when uncertain. Less, she admitted finally. Rich people, they usually want something. They don't help without expecting something in return. Your mother taught me that true wealth isn't about money, Alexander said, moving to sit in one of the comfortable armchairs. He gestured for Sophia to take the one opposite him. Though it took me 20 years and meeting you and Lucas to really understand what she meant. Sophia sat down, her posture still alert, but less rigid than before. Tell me about her, she said, softly. About when you knew her. She never talked much about her past. Alexander leaned back, memories washing over him. I was fresh out of business school, eager to prove myself. The firm I worked for sent me to Nueva Esperanza to oversee some investments. I thought I knew everything, about business, about life. Then I met Isabella. He smiled at the memory. She was assigned as my translator, but she taught me more than just language. She showed me how the local community worked together, how people with almost nothing would share what little they had. I thought I was there to teach them about modern business practices, but she was teaching me about humanity. Did you love her? Sophia's question was direct, her eyes intense. Alexander felt his breath catch. How to explain those complex emotions? From so long ago? I thought I did, he said finally, but I loved an idea of her, the beautiful, passionate woman who challenged everything I thought I knew. I wasn't mature enough to love the real Isabella, the woman who put others first, who saw wealth in community rather than currency. Lucas had wandered over during this conversation, drawn perhaps by the serious tone of their voices. He climbed into Sophia's lap, and she automatically adjusted to hold him, never breaking her gaze from Alexander. The last time I saw her, Alexander continued, she gave me that pendant, identical to yours. She said it would remind me that true. Wealth comes from what we give, not what we take. I kept it for years in my office drawer, looking at it sometimes when difficult decisions crossed my desk. But I never really understood its meaning until today. And now? Sophia asked, echoing her question from breakfast, but this time with less challenge and more curiosity. Now, Alexander said, looking at the two children who had upended his carefully ordered world, I think I'm finally ready to learn what your mother tried to teach me all those years ago. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Alexander rose to answer it, finding a hotel staff member with several shopping bags. The clothes and supplies you requested, Mr. Morgan, the young man said quietly. As Alexander brought the bags in, Lucas's eyes lit up at the sight of new toys peeking out of one of them. Sophia, however, remained in her chair, watching Alexander with an expression that mixed hope and wariness in equal measure. I know this doesn't fix everything, Alexander said, setting the bags down. And I know you have no reason to trust that I'll stick around. But I'd like to try to help, not just with things like this, he gestured to the bags, but with building a real future for you and Lucas. The kind of future Isabella would have wanted for you. As afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the luxurious suite, Sophia helped Lucas explore his new toys. The little boy's excitement was contagious, his joy at simple things like a stuffed bear and colored blocks making even his serious sister smile. Alexander watched them from his position by the window, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. His phone, when he finally turned it back on, exploded with notifications. Missed calls, urgent messages, emails marked with red exclamation points. The world he'd built over 20 years was demanding his attention. But for the first time, it didn't seem like the most important thing in his life. Is everything okay? Sophia asked, noticing his frown as he scrolled through his messages. Just work, he replied, putting the phone away again. Nothing that can't wait. Sophia's expression grew serious. You don't have to stay. We'll be fine here for now. She was trying to sound confident, but Alexander could hear the slight tremor in her voice, the fear of being abandoned again. Actually, he said, moving to sit on the couch near them, there are some things we need to discuss about the future. He watched as Sophia tensed slightly, automatically pulling Lucas closer to her side. Not bad things, he added quickly, but important ones. Lucas looked up from his blocks, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Are we going to stay here forever? He asked, his innocent question cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Alexander leaned forward, making sure to meet both children's eyes. This hotel is temporary, he said gently, but if you're willing, I'd like to offer you something more permanent. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small leather folder. Inside were papers he'd had his assistant prepare and courier over while the children were getting cleaned up earlier. This is preliminary, he explained, but it's a start. Legal guardianship papers. It would give me the right to take care of you both, to make sure you have everything you need, a home, education, security. Sophia took the papers with trembling hands, her eyes scanning the legal language. You want to be our guardian, legally? Yes, Alexander replied simply. It's just a first step, but it would protect you both, give you stability. You wouldn't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from or where you'll sleep at night. Lucas had abandoned his blocks and was now looking between his sister and Alexander with curious eyes. Like a papa? He asked innocently. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Alexander felt his throat tighten with emotion. "That would be up to you," he said carefully. "Both of you. I know I can't replace anyone, and I wouldn't try to, but I'd like to help, to be there for you both." Sophia was still staring at the papers, her expression unreadable. "Why?" she asked finally, looking up at him. "Why would you want to take on this responsibility? We're not your problem." "No, you're not a problem," Alexander agreed. "You're Isabella's children." And maybe this is what she knew would happen when she wrote that message on the photograph. Maybe this is my chance to finally understand what she tried to teach me about family, about what really matters in life. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city he'd spent so long conquering. "I've built an empire of steel and glass, made more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But sitting here today, watching you two, I felt more alive than I have in 20 years. What if we're not what you expect?" Sophia's voice was small, vulnerable, in a way he hadn't heard before. "What if it's too hard?" Alexander turned back to face them. "Life isn't about what's easy, Sophia. Your mother taught me that, though I didn't listen well enough at the time. It's about what's right, what's meaningful." Lucas had moved to stand beside his sister, his small hand finding hers. The sun pendant around Sophia's neck caught the afternoon light, sending a bright reflection across the room, a small sign, perhaps, of hope and possibility. "You don't have to decide right now," Alexander said gently. "Take time to think about it. We can stay here at the hotel for a few days, get to know each other better, see if this could work." Sophia nodded slowly, her free hand touching the pendant as she often did when deep in thought. "Mama always said that sometimes life brings us exactly what we need, even if it's not what we expected," she said quietly, almost to herself. The following days fell into an unexpected rhythm at the Carlisle. Alexander had moved into an adjoining suite, close enough to be available if needed, but giving the children their own space. Each morning they shared breakfast together, Lucas's excitement over the variety of foods never diminishing. Sophia gradually began to relax, though her protective instincts remained sharp. But on the fourth morning, as Alexander arrived for breakfast, he found Sophia sitting alone at the dining table, her face tight with worry. "Lucas has a fever," she said before he could ask. "He was warm all night and now he won't eat." Her hands were clasped tightly around her pendant, knuckles white with tension. Alexander moved immediately to the bedroom, where Lucas lay, curled up in the massive bed, his small face flushed. The little boy opened his eyes as Alexander approached, managing a weak smile. "I don't feel good," Lucas whispered, his voice raspy. "I'll call my personal physician," Alexander said already, reaching for his phone. Sophia appeared in the doorway, hovering uncertainly. "We don't have insurance," she said quietly, "or papers, the hospitals." "Don't worry about that," Alexander interrupted gently. "Dr. Sarah Chen has been my doctor for years. She's discreet, and she makes house calls. She'll be here within the hour." As they waited for the doctor, Alexander watched Sophia tend to her brother with practiced care, adjusting his pillows, coaxing him to sip water, singing soft Spanish lullabies that reminded Alexander painfully of Isabella. He realized that this was probably the first time since their mother's passing that Sophia could share the burden of caring for a sick child. Dr. Chen arrived promptly, her professional demeanor softening as she examined Lucas. "It's just a bad cold," she assured them after the examination. "With proper rest and medication, he should be fine in a few days." She wrote out prescriptions, which Alexander immediately sent his assistant to fill. Later that evening, after Lucas had taken his medicine and fallen into a peaceful sleep, Alexander found Sophia standing by the window, her reflection in the glass showing tears she was trying to hide. "He's going to be fine," Alexander said softly, maintaining a respectful distance. "I know," Sophia replied, wiping her eyes quickly. "It's just, when he gets sick, it reminds me of before, of being alone, of not being able to help him properly." She turned to face Alexander. "Do you know what it's like to watch someone you love suffer and not be able to do anything about it?" The question hit Alexander like a physical blow. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." He moved to stand beside her at the window, both of them looking out at the city lights. "When I left Nueva Esperanza, left your mother, I told myself it was the right thing to do, that I couldn't give her what she wanted, that our worlds were too different. But the truth is I was afraid." Sophia turned to look at him. "Afraid of what?" "Of caring too much, of being responsible for someone else's happiness, of failing." He smiled sadly. "I thought building my business empire would protect me from ever feeling vulnerable again. Instead, it just left me empty." "And now?" Sophia's voice was barely above a whisper. "Now I'm terrified," Alexander admitted. "Terrified of failing you and Lucas, of not being what you need. But I'm more afraid of walking away again, of making the same mistake I made with your mother." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. "When Lucas first got sick after Mama, I was so scared. We were staying in a shelter and he had such a high fever. One of the other mothers there helped us, showed me how to bring the fever down with cool cloths. She didn't have to help, but she did." "Like your mother would have done," Alexander said softly. Sophia nodded. "She always said that kindness creates ripples, that one act of helping someone can change everything." She turned to face Alexander fully. "Is that what you're trying to do? Create ripples?" "I'm trying to do what's right," he replied. "What I should have done 20 years ago, recognize that real wealth isn't in bank accounts or business deals, but in the connections we make, the lives we touch." From the bedroom came the sound of Lucas coughing. Sophia immediately moved toward the sound, but paused in the doorway. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for being here, for helping." Then she disappeared into the bedroom, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts and the glittering city beyond the window. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Alexander was reviewing some urgent business documents in his suite when his assistant called to inform him that someone was asking for him in the lobby. A Mr. and Mrs. Torres from Nueva Esperanza, claiming to be relatives of Sophia and Lucas. Alexander's heart raced as he made his way down to the lobby. He found a middle-aged couple standing near the front desk, their clothing and manner suggesting they were more comfortable in working-class surroundings than the luxury of the Carlisle. "Mr. Morgan?" The man stepped forward, extending his hand. "I'm Roberto Torres, Isabella Martinez's brother. This is my wife, Elena." Alexander shook their hands, his mind spinning. Isabella had mentioned a brother, but they had lost touch years ago. "How did you find us?" "Word travels in our community," Elena explained. "When we heard about two children matching Sophia and Lucas's description being helped by a wealthy businessman, we started making calls. It wasn't hard to track down the famous Alexander Morgan." There was an edge to her voice that made Alexander uneasy. "The children are upstairs. Lucas has been sick, but he's recovering. Would you like to see them?" Roberto's expression hardened slightly. "We've been looking for them since Isabella's passing. They belong with family, Mr. Morgan, not with a stranger in a fancy hotel." The word struck Alexander like a physical blow. Before he could respond, he heard Sophia's voice behind him. "Tio Roberto. Tia Elena?" Sophia stood near the elevator, her face a mixture of surprise and wariness. She must have followed him down, curious about the unexpected visitors. "Sophia, mi amor." Elena moved forward to embrace her, but Sophia took a step back, her hand automatically going to her pendant. "Why are you here?" Sophia asked, her voice carrying a strength that belied her age. "We're here to take you home, sweetie," Elena said softly. "You and Lucas belong with family." Sophia's expression hardened in a way that reminded Alexander painfully of Isabella. "Where were you when Mama needed help? When we needed somewhere to stay?" Roberto stepped forward, his face pained. "Sophia, we didn't know. We lost touch with your mother years ago. If we had known—" "You knew where we were," Sophia interrupted. "Mama wrote to you. She called. You never answered." The lobby fell, silent except for the soft music playing through hidden speakers. Alexander watched as years of hurt and abandonment played across Sophia's young face. "We made mistakes," Roberto admitted. "But we're here now, we want to make it right." "By taking us away from someone who actually helped us?" Sophia's voice cracked slightly. "Alexander found us. He helped us without asking for anything. He's taking care of Lucas when he's sick." "Where were you then?" Elena reached out again, but Sophia moved closer to Alexander. The gesture wasn't lost on anyone present. "Mr. Morgan," Roberto said, his voice tight, "I appreciate what you've done for my niece and nephew. But they need to be with family. We can provide a proper home, stability." "They have that now," Alexander interrupted quietly, "and they'll have more. I'm filing for legal guardianship." The announcement hung in the air like a challenge. Roberto's face darkened. "You have no right. You're not family." "Family is more than blood," Sophia said suddenly, her voice clear and strong. "Mama taught us that. Family is who's there when you need them, who helps without being asked, who stays." Alexander felt something warm press against his hand. Sophia had moved to stand beside him, her small hand finding his. The gesture carried more meaning than any legal document could convey. "Perhaps," Alexander said carefully, "we should all sit down and discuss what's best for the children, not here in the lobby, but upstairs where Lucas is resting. We can talk about the future, all of us together." Roberto and Elena exchanged glances, years of pride and hurt visible in their expressions. Finally, Roberto nodded. "For the children," he said quietly. As they moved toward the elevator, Alexander felt Sophia's hand squeeze his slightly. He looked down to find her watching him with trust in her eyes, trust he knew he would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve. The elevator ride was silent, each adult lost in their own thoughts, while Sophia stood straight and tall, her pendant catching the light with each floor they passed. Alexander realized that the real challenge was just beginning, not just helping these children, but healing the rifts in a family torn apart by pride, misunderstanding, and the passage of time. The hotel suite felt smaller with Roberto and Elena Torres present. Lucas, still recovering from his fever, sat propped up in bed, his eyes wide as he took in the presence of the aunt and uncle he barely remembered. Sophia remained close to Alexander, her posture tense but determined. "He looks so much like Isabella," Elena whispered, watching Lucas from the doorway. The little boy clutched his new stuffed bear tighter, uncertain about these strangers who claimed to be family. Alexander gestured for everyone to sit in the suite's living room. "I think we all want what's best for Sophia and Lucas," he began diplomatically. "Perhaps we can start there." Roberto leaned forward in his chair. "What's best is for them to be with family, in a proper home, with people who understand their culture, their background." "We have a home," Sophia interjected. "Alexander is giving us one." "A hotel suite isn't a home, mi amor," Elena said gently. "No," Alexander agreed, surprising everyone. "It's not. That's why I've already started looking at houses near the best schools in the city. Something with a yard for Lucas to play in, rooms the children can make their own." He pulled out his tablet, showing them photographs of properties his real estate agent had sent over. Roberto's expression softened slightly. "You're serious about this? About taking responsibility for them?" "More serious than I've ever been about anything in my life," Alexander replied. He looked at Sophia, then back at the Torres. "But I also know they need their family, all of their family. I'm not trying to replace anyone or erase their past. I want to help build their future." Elena wiped tears from her eyes. "We should have been there," she said softly. "When Isabella needed us, pride and old arguments kept us apart. She reached out, but we—" Her voice broke. Sophia's rigid posture softened slightly. "Mama used to say that the sun pendant represents hope," she said, touching her necklace. "That even on the darkest days, light finds a way through." "She always was the wisest of us," Roberto admitted. He looked at Alexander with new understanding. "You knew her, didn't you? Before?" Alexander nodded. 20 years ago in Nueva Esperanza, she taught me lessons I took too long to learn. About what really matters in life, about the true meaning of wealth and family." Lucas's voice came from the bedroom doorway where he had been quietly listening. "Can Tio Roberto and Tia Elena stay for dinner?" The simple question, asked with a child's innocence, seemed to break through the tension in the room. Elena laughed softly, tears still in her eyes. "Only if it's okay with your—" She paused, looking at Alexander questioningly. "Alexander," Sophia supplied. "He's our Alexander." The simple declaration hung in the air, carrying more weight than any legal term could convey. Alexander felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced since those long-ago days in Nueva Esperanza. "Of course they can stay," he said, smiling at Lucas. "We can order whatever you'd like." As Lucas excitedly described his favorite foods from the hotel's menu to his aunt and uncle, Sophia moved to stand beside Alexander. "You meant what you said? About the house and schools?" "Every word," he replied quietly. "But Sophia, your aunt and uncle are right about one thing. You need your family, your heritage. I don't want to take you away from that. Maybe we can find a way to bring everyone together, to heal old wounds." Sophia looked at her relatives, who were now fully engaged with Lucas's animated description of his new toys. "Mama would have liked that," she said softly. "She always said that forgiveness is the bridge that connects past and future." Alexander watched as the scene before him transformed, Roberto taking out his phone to show Lucas pictures of cousins he had never met, Elena gently asking Sophia about her favorite subjects in school, the barriers of hurt and mistrust slowly beginning to crumble. The next few weeks brought changes that transformed all their lives. Alexander found a brownstone on the Upper West Side, close to Central Park and some of the city's best schools. The house needed work, but that became part of the healing process. Roberto, who owned a construction company back home, offered advice on renovations, while Elena's experience as an interior designer helped make the space feel like a real home. Sophia and Lucas were involved in every decision, from choosing paint colors to picking out furniture. Alexander watched as the children slowly began to believe in the permanence of their new life, their fears of another displacement gradually fading. One Saturday morning, as Alexander supervised the installation of a custom bookshelf in what would be the library, he found Sophia sitting on the window seat, holding her mother's wooden box. "I think this house needs something," she said thoughtfully, running her fingers over the box's smooth surface. "What's that?" Alexander asked, sitting beside her. Sophia opened the box and carefully removed the photographs inside, including the one of Alexander and Isabella from 20 years ago. "Memories," she said. "Not just new ones, but old ones too, so we don't forget where we came from." Alexander looked at the young girl beside him, seeing Isabella's wisdom shining through her daughter's eyes. "You're right," he said softly. "This house should tell your whole story, not just the new chapters we're writing." That afternoon, they worked together to create a family wall in the main hallway. Photographs from the wooden box were carefully framed, Isabella holding baby Lucas, Sophia's first day of school, and yes, even the picture of Alexander and Isabella in Nueva Esperanza. Alongside these, they added new photos. Lucas playing in Central Park, Sophia reading in her new room, Roberto and Elena helping with the house renovations. "It's like a map," Lucas observed, looking up at the growing collection of memories. "A map of our family." Elena, who had arrived with Roberto to help paint the kitchen, wrapped an arm around her nephew. "Families are like gardens, pequeño," she said. "They need care and attention to grow, and sometimes they grow in unexpected ways." Alexander watched as Sophia added another photo to the wall, one taken just days ago, of all of them having dinner together in the half-finished dining room, sitting on folding chairs and eating take-out Chinese food, but laughing and sharing. Stories like a real family. "Your mother would be proud," Roberto said quietly, coming to stand beside Alexander. "Not just of the children, but of you too. You've given them more than a home. You've given them hope." Alexander thought about the sun pendant that still sat in his office drawer, the one Isabella had given him so long ago. "Actually," he said, "they've given me something far more valuable. They've shown me what Isabella tried to teach me 20 years ago. That real wealth isn't in bank accounts or business deals, but in the connections we make and the love we share. Sophia, overhearing this, came to join them. "Is that why you're spending less time at the office?" she asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. Alexander laughed. "Am I that obvious?" "My board members called," she said, mimicking his serious business tone. "They're concerned about your new work-life balance." The fact that she could joke about this, that she felt secure enough in their relationship to tease him, meant more to Alexander than any business success ever had. "Well," he replied, playing along, "they'll have to get used to it. I have more important investments to manage now." Lucas tugged at his sleeve. "Can we have pizza for dinner? With Tio Roberto and Tia Elena? Only if you help me pick out the perfect spot for your mother's photograph in your room," Alexander answered, ruffling the boy's hair. As they all moved through the house, discussing paint colors and furniture placement, sharing memories and making plans for the future, Alexander realized that Isabella had been right all along. The true measure of a person's wealth wasn't in what they possessed, but in what they gave away, not just in material things, but in love, trust, and the willingness to open their heart to unexpected possibilities. The morning of the guardianship, hearing arrived with a mix of anticipation and nervous energy. Alexander stood in front of his mirror, adjusting his tie for the 10th time, when a small knock at his door caught his attention. "Come in," he called, already knowing who it would be. Sophia entered, wearing a new navy blue dress that Elena had helped her choose. Her pendant caught the morning light, sending familiar patterns dancing across the walls. "Are you nervous?" she asked, watching him fidget with his tie again. Alexander smiled, dropping his hands from the perfectly straight tie. "Terrified," he admitted. "You?" "A little," she said, moving to sit on the edge of his bed. "But not about the hearing. I'm nervous about what comes after, about doing normal things like going to school and making friends, about being regular kids." The confession caught Alexander off guard. In all their preparations for the legal proceedings, he hadn't considered that the prospect of normality might be as daunting for the children as their previous struggles had been. "There's nothing regular about you and Lucas," he said, sitting beside her. "You're extraordinary, and you don't have to change who you are or forget what you've been through. Those experiences are part of who you are." Sophia nodded, her hand automatically going to her pendant. "Mama used to say that our past is like the rising sun. It shapes our day but doesn't control it." "She was very wise," Alexander said softly. "And she'd be so proud of how you've taken care of Lucas, of how strong you've been." From downstairs came the sound of Lucas's laughter mixing with Elena's voice. She and Roberto had arrived early to help get everyone ready for court. The sounds of family life filling the house still surprised Alexander sometimes, making him wonder how he'd lived so long in the silence of his former existence. "Alexander?" Sophia's voice pulled him back from his thoughts. "What if the judge says no? Then we appeal," he replied without hesitation. "We fight. I'm not giving up on this family we're building. Not ever." Sophia's smile was bright enough to rival her pendant's gleam. "Promise." "Promise," he said firmly. "Now, shall we go down and make sure your brother hasn't convinced your aunt to let him wear his superhero cape to court?" The scene downstairs was organized chaos. Lucas, thankfully not in a cape but in a smart little suit that matched Alexander's, was showing Roberto his latest art project. Elena was fussing with the boy's hair while simultaneously giving last-minute instructions about lunch preparations to the new housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind grandmother figure who had been recommended by Roberto's church community. "Ah, there you are," Eleanor exclaimed when she saw them. "Sophia, mi amor, come let me fix your hair. I brought Mama's special hairpin, the one with the silver flowers, I thought you might like to wear it today." Sophia's eyes widened at the sight of the delicate pin. "I remember this," she whispered. "Mama wore it on special days." As Elena carefully arranged Sophia's hair, Roberto pulled Alexander aside. "Whatever happens today," he said quietly, "Elena and I want you to know that we see what you've done for these children, how you've opened your heart and your home. Your family now, whether the judge makes it official or not." Alexander felt his throat tighten with emotion. From adversaries to family in just a few short weeks, Isabella would have loved the poetry of it. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared with a tray of traditional Mexican hot chocolate, a morning ritual she had introduced that the children adored. "For strength and sweetness," she said with a warm smile, passing out the cups. As they all stood in the kitchen, sipping their chocolate and trying to calm pre-court nerves, Alexander looked around at this unlikely family they had created. Sophia, wearing her grandmother's hairpin and her mother's pendant. Lucas, his suit already slightly rumpled, but his smile bright as ever. Roberto and Elena, who had moved past old hurts to embrace new possibilities. Mrs. Rodriguez, adding her own brand of maternal warmth to the household. The family court building was imposing, its marble halls echoing with footsteps and whispered conversations. Alexander's lawyer, Sarah Bennett, met them at the entrance, her warm smile helping to ease some of the tension. "Everything's in order," she assured them quietly. "The home study reports are excellent, the financial security is unquestionable, and most importantly, we have strong character testimonials from the children's aunt and uncle supporting your guardianship." They were shown into a smaller courtroom, more intimate than Alexander had expected. Judge Maria Sandoval, a woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, reviewed their paperwork carefully while they waited. Lucas sat between Sophia and Alexander, holding both their hands. He had been unusually quiet all morning, as if sensing the importance of the day. Elena and Roberto sat directly behind them, a solid presence of family support. "Mr. Morgan," Judge Sandoval finally spoke, looking up from the papers, "your petition for guardianship is quite thorough, but I'd like to hear from the children themselves." She smiled gently at Sophia and Lucas. "Would you be comfortable talking with me in my chambers?" Sophia squeezed Lucas's hand reassuringly as they followed the judge. Alexander watched them go, his heart pounding. Everything hinged on what the children would say, on whether they truly wanted this new life they were building. The minutes stretched endlessly. Alexander found himself reaching into his pocket, where he now carried Isabella's old pendant, the twin to Sophia's, as a reminder of the promises he was making, not just to the children, but to their mother's memory as well. Elena reached forward and squeezed his shoulder. "They love you," she whispered. "Anyone can see that." When the children returned, Lucas was smiling and Sophia's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but she was smiling too. Judge Sandoval followed them, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Morgan," she began, settling back behind her bench, "I've been a family court judge for 20 years. I've seen all kinds of families come through my courtroom. What strikes me about this case is not the material security you can provide, though that's certainly important, but the emotional home you've already created." She smiled at Roberto and Elena. "The fact that you've worked to include the children's extended family, to honor their heritage and their mother's memory, speaks volumes, and the children." She looked at Sophia and Lucas with warm appreciation. "They've shown remarkable wisdom in choosing to trust you." Alexander held his breath as Judge Sandoval picked up her pen. "Sophia and Lucas Martinez Morgan," she said, writing as she spoke, "has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" The weight of those hyphenated words filled the courtroom. Lucas broke into a huge grin while Sophia's tears finally spilled over. "The petition for guardianship is granted," Judge Sandoval announced officially. "Congratulations to all of you on building this beautiful family." The next few moments were a blur of hugs and tears and laughter. Lucas threw himself into Alexander's arms, while Sophia hugged Elena and Roberto. Court staff smiled indulgently at the display of emotion, used to seeing happy endings in this room. As they gathered their things to leave, Sophia approached Judge Sandoval's bench. "Thank you," she said softly, touching her pendant, "for seeing what we already knew in our hearts." The judge smiled. "Sometimes," she replied, "the heart makes the wisest decisions of." So, outside the courthouse, standing in the bright New York sunshine, Alexander found himself surrounded by his family, no longer just on paper, but in all the ways that truly mattered. Sophia and Lucas, his children now in the eyes of the law. Roberto and Elena, the bridge to their past and part of their future. Even Mrs. Rodriguez had come to meet them, bringing traditional Mexican pastries to celebrate. "Group photo," Elena called out, waving to a passing court photographer she had befriended earlier. They gathered together on the courthouse steps. Alexander with an arm around each child, Roberto and Elena flanking them, all smiling broadly. As the photographer counted down, Sofia looked up at Alexander. "Now we're officially family," she said. "No, mi amor," he replied softly, using the endearment he'd heard Elena use so often. "We were already family. This just makes it easier for everyone else to see what we've known all along." 1 year had passed since the courthouse steps. The brownstone had transformed from a renovation project into a true home, filled with the warmth of family life and the echoes of shared memories. The family wall in the hallway had grown, new photographs joining the old ones, telling the continuing story of their lives together. On a crisp autumn morning, Alexander sat in his home office, preparing for a meeting that felt more important than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. Sofia and Lucas were at school, Sofia excelling in her classes at the prestigious academy they'd chosen together, Lucas charming his way through first grade with his endless enthusiasm. He opened his desk drawer and removed both sun pendants, Sofia's mother's original one that he'd kept all these years, and the one Sofia still wore daily. Today he would give his pendant to Lucas, completing a circle that had begun 20 years ago in Nueva Esperanza. "Everything ready?" Elena's voice came from the doorway. She and Roberto had flown in from Texas specifically for this weekend's celebration. Alexander smiled, holding up the pendants. "Almost. Do you think they'll understand what this means?" "Sofia will," Elena said softly, entering the office. "She's so much like Isabella. She sees the deeper meaning in things. And Lucas, he'll understand in his own way, in his own time." The sound of the front door opening and children's voices floating up the stairs announced the end of the school day. Alexander quickly tucked the pendants into his jacket pocket. "Papa!" Lucas's voice rang through the house. They had started using the term naturally a few months ago, and it still made Alexander's heart skip a beat every time he heard it. "We learned about family trees today." Alexander and Elena emerged from the office to find Lucas bouncing with excitement in the hallway, his backpack still on while Sofia was carefully hanging up her coat. "Really?" Alexander asked, helping Lucas with his backpack. "And what did you learn?" "That families are like trees with lots of branches," Lucas explained enthusiastically. "But Sofia said our family is special because we grew new branches." Sofia rolled, her eyes affectionately at her brother's explanation, but Alexander could see the thoughtfulness behind her expression. "Is that what you think?" he asked her gently. She touched her pendant, a gesture that had become more of a grounding habit than a nervous one. "I think our family is like the sun," she said carefully. "It spreads light in all directions, touching people who might have stayed in shadow otherwise." Eleanor wiped a tear from her eye, mumbling something about needing to check on dinner. Alexander felt his own eyes growing moist. "Speaking of the sun," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I have something for both of you. Something that's been waiting for the right moment." He led them into the living room, where Roberto had joined them, having arrived from checking on the catering arrangements for tomorrow's celebration. The children sat on the couch, Lucas still buzzing with school day energy, Sofia watching Alexander with curious eyes. 20 years ago, Alexander began, sitting across from them, "your mother gave me something precious." He removed the old pendant from his pocket. "She said it would remind me of what really matters in life. I didn't understand then, but I do now." He held out the pendant, its aged silver catching the afternoon light. "Lucas, this belonged to your mother, and before that to your grandmother. Tomorrow we're celebrating 1 year as a legal family, but we've been a real family since that day in the bakery. I think it's time for you to have this." Lucas's eyes grew wide as Alexander placed the pendant in his small hands. "It matches Sofia's." "Yes, it does," Alexander smiled, "because they're two parts of the same whole, just like our family." The next day, the brownstone was filled with the joyful chaos of celebration. Friends and family had gathered to commemorate the official 1-year anniversary of their family's legal formation. Mrs. Rodriguez had outdone herself with a feast that blended traditional Mexican dishes with New York favorites. The house was filled with laughter, music, and the warm embrace of community. Sophia and Lucas, both wearing their sun pendants, moved through the crowd with confidence, no longer the uncertain children from the bakery. Lucas charmed everyone with his stories, while Sophia helped coordinate the younger cousins who had flown in with various aunts and uncles from Texas. Alexander stood back, watching it all with a full heart. His business associates who had attended were seeing a side of him they'd never known existed, the devoted father, the man who had found wealth beyond measure in the love of his children and the embrace of an extended family. As the evening wound down, Sophia found him in a quiet corner of the garden where he had stepped out for a moment of reflection. "Thinking about Mama?" she asked, joining him on the garden bench. Alexander smiled. She knew him so well now. "Yes," he admitted, wondering what she would think of all this. "She knows," Sophia said with quiet confidence. "She planned it all along." She pulled something from her pocket, the photograph they had found that day in the hotel, the one with Isabella's message about fate being kind. "When did you get so wise?" Alexander asked, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I had good teachers," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "You, Mama, Tia Elena, even Lucas in his own way." From inside came the sound of Lucas's delighted laughter, followed by Roberto's deep chuckle. The garden lights cast a warm glow over the flowers they had planted together, each bloom chosen to remind them of Nueva Esperanza. "You know," Sophia said thoughtfully, "in school we learned about how light travels, how it can take years for the light from some stars to reach us." She touched her pendant. "I think love is like that sometimes. Mama's love traveled through time, through these pendants, through memories and choices, to bring us all together." Alexander felt tears prick his eyes. "When did my little girl become a philosopher?" Sophia laughed. "Around the same time my businessman father learned to plant flowers and make pancakes on Sunday mornings." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the happy sounds from inside. Then Sophia spoke again, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you, Papa, not just for taking us in, but for helping us build something new while keeping what matters from the past, for showing us that family can grow in unexpected ways." Alexander hugged her closer, his heart full. "Thank you, mi amor, for teaching me what real wealth is, for giving me the chance to be your father." Lucas's voice called from inside. "Papa, Sophia, you're missing the cake." They stood together, ready to rejoin the celebration. As they walked back into the house, Alexander caught a glimpse of their reflection in the garden windows. Father and daughter, both wearing pieces of Isabella's legacy around their necks, both carrying her light forward in their own ways. The home they had built together was more than just a house filled with beautiful things. It was a testament to the power of love, to bridge distances, heal old wounds, and create new beginnings. It was proof that sometimes the greatest wealth comes not from what we gain, but from what we give, and that the strongest families are the ones we build together, one act of kindness at a time. In the warm light